אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך.
Welcome to the Yom HaShoah Commemoration, sponsored by the Cantors and Rabbis Association of Greater San Jose. It is our honor to welcome you here tonight as we gather together as community, as we gather together to remember, as we gather together to tell stories, to share memories, to share liturgy that brings us together. We'll light 6 candles at the beginning of the service, and then you'll hear from rabbis and cantors in our greater community as well as our school children. And we thank you for being here tonight. We thank you for helping us create this evening together. We begin with silence, the silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence. The silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences. And in silences, we'll light our candles.
Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile, and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longing. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death.
Seventh grade students from the Sinai Religious School have spent part of this year learning about the Holocaust. They recently wrote poems and created artwork based on their experiences. I'm honored to introduce Eros Solnit, Maya Meir, and Noga Meir, who will share their creations.
My path. I walk along the unforgiving road of life. My road is a happy one. I see sunshine smiling through the trees and birds flutter in the sky. But all roads end, and I was taken away onto a road of uneven cobblestone instead of grass, a road with clouds instead of sun. And I know that I can never go back. I can never see the birds again. I can never see the sun. No more grass, no more butterflies, no more stars. My scissors were taken away from me. My brothers were killed. I find no happiness anymore. Only starvation, thirst, and sickness awaits me. But here I stand, knowing that I am what is left of my family, and that I need to stay strong for them. Maybe one day I shall return to my first path. Maybe I shall see the light of day again. But if it ever happens, I shall never forget my time on this road, but I will pray to never return.
You can never promise. It's funny now, but back then it wasn't. People make promises they can't even keep. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. This is because they have no idea about the future or what will happen in it. They say things like, I'll help you, I'll be here for you, things will get better. I promise. It's 10 months later and you're not here. Things don't get better. This situation is because you promised. You can never promise, you can only plan.
Eternal darkness. What one person treasures, another despises. The people stripped of their dignity, every last shred of their sanity, slipping away to the eternal darkness. We the people, we the humans, we the destroyers of nature itself. Our smarts, our wits, our intelligence. Ripped away from us like a bird from a cab. The eternal darkness, the eternal pain, the suffering we cannot sustain. Nothing will stop us, nothing can help. As long as we listen to the sound of the future, we will be in eternal darkness. The world is our own, and the world owes us. Whatever we lost, the eternal darkness will kill us at last. So many mistakes, so many failures. When will this end? Is there an end? These questions we ask, the answers we get. Our biggest flaws are our greatest assets. When one does not see the magnitude of life, we will never end this eternal darkness.
Who Am I to Speak of a Time? By Ron Adler. Who am I to speak of a time, of families crushed, of crimes of mankind, of children in hiding and living in fear, of mothers trying to hide all of their tears, of fathers praying to an empty heaven, of people dying again and again? Who am I to know what it was like to be persecuted day after day and trapped by the night? To be surrounded by a world turned upside down? To be starved and tortured and beaten to the ground? To witness a nation of hate marching past? To see all of their dreams broken and shattered like glass? Who am I to mention their suffering and pain, the ghettos, the camps, life and death inhumane? I wasn't even born. I wasn't even there. It happened long ago. It could never happen here. Who am I to know what God had in mind when the virtues of man were buried alive, when good lost to evil and hope turned to despair, when hell upon earth seemed everywhere? And who am I to let their memories be forgotten, to say nothing and do nothing as it never happened, to forsake the loss of our Jewish family, to live in a world full of complacency?
A Yom HaShoah prayer by Devin Spire. As the world grips tightly at our necks and life draws so near to us that our deaths are mere inches from our faces, the voice of God moves from above to below. For your sake did I create the whole world, and for the sake of those unlike you, did I scatter myself into far-flung tiny pieces in the narrow, hidden, hard-to-reach places of the lonely universe. The holy is broken. The broken is holy. Every body lives in the broken search for the holy in all of creation.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Seaman, and I've been invited to share with you something of my life as it relates to Yom HaShoah, which we are commemorating today. As a young child, I was surrounded by death. My first experience with it was shocking. It took place in the last months of World War II when I was 6 years old. Incarcerated at the women's and children's barracks of the Star Camp in the Nazi concentration camp Bergen-Belsen, I would wake up in the mornings and look out the window. I saw corpses piled upon each other alongside the outer wall of a barracks and the adjacent section of the camp. It looked horrendous to me. I couldn't understand what I had seen. My parents, Maria and Erich Rosenthal, had fled their native Germany for the Netherlands in 1937 to escape persecution of Jewish people. I was born in Rotterdam. The rest of my immediate family also fled Germany. The year before my parents and I were sent to Bergen-Belsen, my father's parents were arrested and killed in gas chambers in Poland. I personally experienced death next when my father died at Bergen-Belsen in January 1945. He had been confined to the infirmary because he had typhus and was starving. On several occasions, my mother sent me to visit him because she was unable to walk at the time. The winter was extremely cold, and I was chilled to the center of my being in the freezing weather. After visiting my father, I told my mother that he'd been asleep, and so I couldn't talk with him. One day, when my mother did visit him, he passed away during her visit. I felt his loss for a very long time after that. On April 13, 1945, my very sick and starving mother and I, along with about 2,000 others, were liberated by US soldiers from a train in which we had been sent from Bergen-Belsen. After some months of recuperation in Hillersleben, we were repatriated to the Netherlands. In 1946, we moved to El Salvador, where my mother's brother lived. And in 1953, we moved to Berkeley, where I attended high school and the University of California. My mother had worked in international firms and was fluent in 5 languages. She made a living by being a multilingual secretary. My mother's attitude about the Holocaust helped me to come to terms with it. She decided that she had to go on with life. She didn't want to be angry and constantly hold grudges. She didn't condone anything the Nazis had done. In fact, she definitely condemned their actions. But she also believed that people are basically good. In the Bible, Solomon asks God to give him an understanding heart with which to make judgments. That is important to me too when I deal with people in my daily life. I want to be open to people, to be aware of others, to respect them and honor them by seeing and understanding them as they would want to be seen and understood. I try not to judge others by my standards. Although this is my goal, I recognize it will take the rest of my lifetime to come close to achieving it. When I was a child, my family was subjected to racism, their rights and property taken from them. As a student, I saw schoolmates shunned and humiliated because they didn't meet a certain standard of beauty or physical ability, and I was also subject to this shunning and snubbing. Later, I learned that many people were denied equality by a perceived majority because of their skin color, their gender, their accent, their mental or physical state, or their economic situation. From these experiences and observations, I learned not to stereotype individuals or groups of people based on the wrongs committed by a small subgroup of these people. While I abhor what the Nazis did, I bear no animosity toward the German people and won't condemn them for what their deranged leaders did and made others do during the 1930s and 1940s. In the same manner, the horrors committed by the terrorists on 9/11 did not reflect adversely on the vast majority of Muslims. Like most of us, they are peace-loving people who condemn the terrorist acts of those who misuse the teachings of their religion for misguided purposes. My work in conflict resolution probably is an outcome of my early life experiences. It involves listening to people without judging or advising them, and teaching them how to listen to each other. These are first steps in helping people in conflict to understand each other, which can point them toward resolving their issues in a non-confrontational, peaceable, restorative manner. The book that I co-authored with my business partners includes tools to help readers resolve conflicts on their own that may come up in their lives. Every day, in all our encounters, we can discover opportunities to transcend past mistakes, misjudgments, and misunderstandings. We can find ways to work together with each other for the peace that was meant to be. Let us celebrate peace, love, and joy so that, as the song states, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
I graduated from a special school. Auschwitz was the name. 4 years I spent there. All my days were nights. Everything that was near and dear to me, they took. Everything that was near and dear to me, they took. There is only one thing worse than Auschwitz itself, and that is if the world forgets that there was such a place.
There are
Shalom, my name is Iris Bendahan, and today I'd like to share the survival story of my mother, Batya Genser. My mother was born to Max Genser, originally from Podwalachsk, currently in the Ukraine, and Mansi Sandler, originally from Budapest. My mother was born in 1936 in Gdansk, which was then the free city of Danzig in Germany. Her extended family all thought of themselves as proud German citizens and all spoke fluent German. Max refused to believe the warnings and was adamant that as upstanding German citizens, they could ride the storm that was brewing until Kristallnacht and then the Nuremberg laws. And by then it was almost too late to save themselves. In fact, my mom's maternal family, the Sandlers, all perished in the Holocaust. In Mansi's Yad Vashem report, it says details unknown, that today we know that those Danzig Jews who were unable to get out by February of 1941 were sent to Polish ghettos and to Theresienstadt, from where they were sent to extermination. We don't know for sure this is how things ended for them, but we can speculate. Mansi, however, was resourceful and beautiful and somehow managed to get her family on a last boat leaving Europe from Bratislava. They got there by train and from there embarked on what would be a 5.5-year escape route. The boat they got on in Bratislava, the Uranus, was one of 4 chartered by Berhold Storfer, who was the main link of Jewish escape through the Danube. The 4 ships brought 3,500 refugees from around Europe to Tulcea in Romania. Berhold Storfer was credited with saving 9,096 Jewish lives with his boats. From Tulcea, they were transferred to 3 old ships sailing to Palestine. My mom and her parents boarded the Atlantic along with 1,880 others. The ship was overcrowded and the passengers had to occupy every space available. And in this way, they arrived in Haifa harbor 6 weeks later. Despite the rousing Hatikva they sang as they approached, they encountered Jews who were rather indifferent to them. The other 2 ships had arrived earlier, and passengers were transferred to the infamous Patria. Just as they began transferring the Atlantic passengers, an explosion aboard the Patria sank her, and 260 refugees died in this accident. The explosion had been a miscalculated Haganah attempt to prevent the Patria's deportation. The British authorities allowed the passengers on the Patria to remain in Palestine. However, the Atlantic passengers, who by then had disembarked and were on Holy Land soil in the refugee camp in Atlit, were forcibly removed and placed on 2 Dutch ships. The young men had actually stripped naked by suggestion of the local Jews, thinking that the protest might help them prevent deportation. But it was to no avail, and 17 days later, the 1,581 Atlantic passengers ended up at the British concentration camp of Beaubassin on the island of Mauritius, a relatively unknown island, which was a household name as I was growing up. The 849 men were accommodated in the cells of the prison. The 635 women and 96 children were housed separately in huts in a compound built especially for them. The men and women were not allowed to see each other until the July of 1942, when the strict rules were relaxed a bit, and after which couples were allowed restricted time together. After this, about 60 babies were born on Mauritius, including my stepmother, Bina Guerreri. The conditions at Beaubassin were nothing like German concentration camps, yet on an average, 10% of the population was in the hospital at a given time, so disease was rampant. My mother contracted an eye infection, nearly lost her eye during this time due to lack of medicines. As with all the places Jews were forced to concentrate, a vibrant social community still developed, and they put together an educational system for the kids, scouts, a camp newspaper, a band, and even a soccer team. Detainees kept busy in workshops that produced wooden and fabric toys, silver jewelry, and other items that were sold to locals outside the camp. By mid-1943, things improved a bit more, and the detainees received permission to take part in a holiday camp, and a grand children's party was given in the women's camp. Most of the support the detainees received was from the Jewish community in South Africa. The community, though thousands of kilometers away, was the closest to Mauritius and helped the detainees obtain food, clothing, medicine, reading materials, and news from the Jewish world. The connection was established through the only local Jew on the island, Isya Berger. Finally, in August of 1945, the detainees were released and boarded the final boat of their journey back to Haifa. The following year, the South African community obtained ownership of the Jewish cemetery, where 128 refugees died of malaria, typhus, and other diseases. They have since renovated the plot, and it is a tourist destination of sorts. So about 5.5 years after leaving Danzig, my mom and her parents were able to begin to establish a new home in Israel. They spent several years in temporary housing before they were able to get an apartment in the new settlement, now city, of Holon, and then get used to not only a life in Israel, but life without any relatives, no grandparents, no aunts and uncles, no cousins. When my mom passed away in 1985, she was the last of her mother's large Sandler family line. For years, I also thought this was the end of my grandfather's line. However, a few years ago, when I began to create my family tree on my heritage, I discovered that many Kestens survived, and they have families all over Europe. A cousin, several times removed, Rabbi Aronson in England, had created a detailed family tree all the way to the first Kestens in Podwalachisk in the late 1700s. My grandfather's closer cousin was the writer Herman Kesten, who actually came to the United States and continued communicating with Max on Mauritius and even sent him money. I wish I could say more about the Sandlers, but I never thought to ask my grandmother about them when I was a teenager. But I vividly remember that whenever something related to her family was brought up, she would begin with, "They were taken by Hitler, Yimach Shemo, may his name be erased." Yet we know today that by not speaking of the unspeakable things, it would be so easy for history to repeat. Unfortunately, the story of the Mauritius detainees was fairly suppressed by Israel. In retrospect, it was an embarrassment that they did not try harder to prevent the deportation of the Atlantic passengers and not to help them once they were there. So until recently, no one except those who were there really knew this history. But this is changing. Now Yad Vashem has hired a team to research the story and bring it to light. The Ghetto Fighters Museum in Israel has an exhibit dedicated to the story. And last year, Ruth, Mansi's best friend, Erika, her daughter, published a book with many details of life on Mauritius that she heard from her mother. If you'd like to know more, check out the Bobasin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center website. And the vigil they held to remember the Jewish deportation to Mauritius is on YouTube. Thank you for listening.
The words of Elie Wiesel, may his memory be a blessing. True, we are often too weak to stop injustices, but the least we can do is to protest against them. True, we are too poor to eliminate hunger, but in feeding one child, we protest against hunger. True, we are too timid and powerless to take on all the guards of all the political prisons in the world, but in offering our solidarity to one prisoner, we denounce all tormentors. True, we are powerless against death, but as long as we keep one man, one woman, one child alive 1 hour longer in safety and dignity, we affirm all people's right to live.
My name is Joyce Maskell, and I'm the only child of 2 Holocaust survivors from Austria. My mother spent 3.5 years in concentration camps, and my father survived the war years in Shanghai, China. I usually talk about my mother's story, but today I want to tell you about my father. They say that attitude is everything, and my father, John Friedman, had a great attitude. It was this quality, together with good instincts, resourcefulness, hard work, an adventurous spirit, and luck, that enabled him to survive the Holocaust relatively unscathed, both physically and emotionally. John was born in the small town of Verbove, Slovakia, on October 19, 1913. He was the only child born to Rudolfina Reisman and Adolf Friedman. Rudolfina was a housewife and Adolf a traveling movie theater operator. When he was 3 months old, John's family moved to Vienna, where he was attending school through 8th grade. When John was 13, his parents divorced and he was raised by his mother. Rudolfina did everything in her power to provide for her son. At age 17, John and his mother moved to a small 5,000-person town in Upper Austria called Vöcklabruck, where she set him up in a small business to sell linoleum. John fell in love with the beauty of the Salzkammergut region with its alpine mountains and lakes. He was very athletic and enjoyed the abundance of winter and summer sports, and made many lifelong friends. In March 1938, German troops marched into Austria. This was known as the Anschluss, the annexation. For the Jews, this meant restrictions and other drastic changes. John was forced to give up his business and his car. One day, a gendarme whom my father knew from Vöcklabruck came to his door to arrest him and asked, "Can you tell me you're not a Jew?" My father replied, "I cannot tell you that." The young man arrested my father and escorted him to the regional Nazi headquarters in Linz. Because they were acquaintances and the soldier didn't want to embarrass John in town, he told my father he wouldn't handcuff him until they reached their destination. While waiting in line to register in Linz, a man advised my father to say you are an auto mechanic and you will live. It was a high-value profession to the Nazis, and chances for survival would be better. Without any work experience other than repairing his own car, John declared he was a mechanic, and my father became a mechanic and remained a mechanic for the rest of his working life. In April 1938, my father was sent from Linz to the Dachau concentration camp. In July of that same year, he was transferred to Buchenwald. Meanwhile, my grandmother worked behind the scenes to secure John's release. She called on a friend who was a criminal police official to help. The police official wrote a letter to the Gestapo and demanded my father's release on the need to have him appear in court on criminal charges. On November 5, 1938, my father was released from Buchenwald under the custody of my grandmother's friend. When they were alone together, the police official asked my father, "What will you do if I let you go?" My father replied, "I will get out of Austria as quickly as possible." John returned to his apartment in Vöcklabruck and then traveled to Vienna to reunite with his mother, who was living there illegally with friends. On November 9, 1938, John was ordered to report his whereabouts to the Vienna police. Sensing trouble from growing Nazi demonstrations and unrest in the streets that day, he decided to leave Vienna and took a night train back to Vöcklabruck. Unknowingly, my father eluded harm by luckily spending Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, on a train. John knew he had to get out of Austria immediately. And he soon learned Jews were able to escape to Shanghai, China without a visa. In December 1938, he obtained a passport and a ticket on an Italian luxury liner, the Victoria, and sailed to Shanghai out of Genoa, Italy. Arriving at the great waterfront street known as the Bund, John saw a beautiful modern city with skyscrapers and cars. Where are the rats and people dying in the street, he wondered. This can't be the dreadful place he heard about back in Vienna. In February 1939, my grandmother was able to secure a ticket to Shanghai for herself after bribing a travel agency porter with all her jewelry. When she arrived, John eagerly greeted her at the port wearing a Red Cross armband. Adjusting to life in Shanghai was very difficult for many of the approximately 20,000 Austrian and German Jewish refugees. Most came there with very little money. They lost their cultural and spiritual roots and lost their means to make a living. Employment opportunities were limited since Jews could not leave the Hongqiu ghetto without a pass, and relatively few were able to obtain one. But John saw Shanghai as a big adventure. Everything was new, different, and exciting. He was able to obtain a pass to leave the ghetto daily for work because there were jobs for mechanics. My father survived the Holocaust and thrived in Shanghai until 1948, when he and his mother left on an airlift to Canada, provided by Jewish organizations. His next great adventure was meeting and marrying my mother, Alice Friedman, another Austrian Holocaust survivor, in Toronto, Canada, and emigrating to the United States, ultimately arriving in Southern California in 1951. My parents lived there until 1997, when they moved to Northern California to be near my husband Jay and me. My father's life during the war years was far from idyllic, and he too endured the well-known atrocities of man's inhumanity to man. He just didn't dwell on it. That's because my father loved life, and his great attitude helped him make the best of every moment. I'd like to share with you some photos of my dad and some artifacts. This is a postcard that my grandmother received from Buchenwald, from the commander there, explaining that my father was released to the custody of the criminal police. These photos are of my grandmother, both when she was young and later in her life. This is my father's passport. You see the big J, the big red J for Jude, and the Nazi symbols with the eagle, the swastika. This is inside the passport, and a photo of my dad. This is about what he looked like when he was going to Shanghai. This is the armband that my father wore when he was greeting his mother at the port when she arrived from Europe. He had a temporary job at the hospital at the time. The lower picture is of my father and his friends that were also mechanics when they were in Shanghai. These are my parents when they got married and later in their life. And this is the last Passover celebrated with my dad in 2005 at the age of 91 before he passed away.
A Shoah memorial prayer. Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace. To those who perished in the Shoah, our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, our rabbis and teachers, our neighbors and children, the named and the unnamed, whose lives were cut off by brutal, vicious, cunning, and calculated violence. May they find peace in the world to come. Remember the survivors who have since passed away, and the virtues of our people who've died at the hand of malice in every generation. We remember the works of their hands and the messages of their hearts. Bless the defenders of Israel with safety and strength, and the righteous of all nations who provide protection, shelter, and comfort to the Jewish people. Let their deeds be a source of favor in heaven and healing on earth. Put an end to anger, hatred, and fear, and lead us to a time when no one will suffer at the hand of another, speedily in our days. May the memories of all who face these horrors be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life, a living blessing in our midst.
Come and buy tobacco, come buy my saccharin. These days there's something selling cheap as dirt.
A life for just a penny, 1 cent is what I earn. About the ghetto peddler, have you heard?
Precies Israelik, ich bin das Heim vom Ghetto. Precies Israelik, I have to look young. Host war blieben, Golem netto, der Leid ich auch noch, als ich konnte.
A coat without a collar, a shirt made from a sack. I have galoshes, haven't got the shoes.
Whoever finds this funny, whoever dares to laugh, I'll show them that I'm not one to abuse.
Precies Israelik, ich bin das Heim vom Ghetto. Precies Israelik, I have to look young. Host war blieben, Golem netto, der Leid ich auch noch, als ich so ungesund. Don't think that God respond me, don't think I have no claim. A mother and a father love me too.
Both were taken from me, it's useless to complain. But like the wind I'm lonely, it is true.
I'm called Yisholek, and when no one is looking from my eyes, I wipe away a tear. But this anguish is not for speaking. Why remember how much can one heart bear?
Please rise if you are able for the El Malay.
Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamiromim, Hamtzei Minucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot Kidoshim Utehorim, Ki Zohar Harakim Mazhirim, Et Nishmot 6,000,000 Acheinu ve'achiotenu Shenehirku al Kiddush Hashem Ba'al Harachamim Yatztirem Miseta Kenafecha Leolamim Bitzro HaChaim Et Nishmatam Adonai Hu Nachalatam Ve'anuach Meshalom Al Mishkavam Ve'nomar Amen.
Holy, compassionate God on high, for our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings, secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Together we say, Amen.
התגדל, אושוויץ, והתקדש, לודז', שמי רבה, פונר, בעלמא דברה חירותה, בבייר, וימליך מלכותה, מיידנק. בחייכון וביום מכון, ברקינאו, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, קובנה, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ינובסקה. ואמרו, אמן. יהיה שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח תירזנשטט. ויתפאר ויתרומם, וכנבלת. ויתנשא ויתהדר טרבלינקה. ויתעלה ויתהלל, וילנה. שמי דקודשה בריחו, ברגן ולסן, לילה, מאותאוזן. מן כל ברכתה ושירתה דחאו, תושבחתה ונחמתה, מינסק. דאמירן בעלמה פורסה, ואמרו אמן. יהיה שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
Shalom, friends. I'm Rabbi Lori Matskin, and I serve as the family educator for PJ Library in Silicon Valley. Although exposure and education about the Holocaust isn't usually advised until middle school, the Shoah is still very important to parents of young children. This year, we reached out to PJ Library parents whose grandparents survived the Shoah. The promise of a vibrant Jewish future is living through their great-grandchildren who receive books each month based on Jewish values, teachings, and traditions. I remember the first time I heard Pavel Friedman's poem, The Last Butterfly, which he wrote in Terezin at age 21, before being deported and killed in Auschwitz. I was 16 and standing at Yad Vashem, at the entrance to the Valley of the Communities, a massive monument dug out of natural bedrock. Over 5,000 names of communities are engraved on the stone walls, and for most, this is literally all that is left of them. We hope that the reading of this poem tonight will evoke both our enormous grief at every human life lost, every child, young adult, parent and grandparent murdered in the Holocaust, and also a feeling of hope, of not only surviving but thriving, and our collective power to rebuild our Jewish future.
The last, the very last. So richly, brightly, dazzling yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone.
Such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye.
For 7 weeks I've lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto. But I have found what I love here. The dandelions call to me and the white chestnut branches in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly.
That butterfly was the last one.
Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto. Pavel Friedman, April 6th, 1942.
On behalf of all my colleagues with the Cantors and Rabbis Association of Greater San Jose, I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for remembering 6 million. Thank you for remembering those ripples. It was not just those who were there, it was the next generations as well who feel that experience, who carry that pain, who carry that story. Thank you for listening to our stories. Thank you for coming together in prayer. Thank you for coming together in community. And thank you for remembering. Good night.